really not quite reached any one point or departure, but I seem to be on a continuum. I just carry on with a daily work. Occasionally, things happen so that they're a little more exciting, but ordinarily they're just the regular daily work.
I think that ultimately his legacy cannot be channeled into one area alone. Yes, a lot of people know him best as a furniture designer.
Some of the very first works that he had done, which were functional in terms of metal, were chairs that he had designed.
He really enjoyed having his commissioned monumental pieces.
Most famously with his commission for public sculpture for the Standard Oil Commission. One of the most substantial, he did a lot of public commissions, but this was really just a blockbuster.
He wanted that to be a pleasurable experience for people.
He was a direct connection of nature, and almost in a magnified sense, where if we look at the little dandelion puff in the lawn, where some people might just step over it or step on it, Harry magnified 120 times to really see what we have here in nature, making it out of metal.
Harry would work with liquid metal. This is not something like working with a paintbrush or a pencil. This is quite different, and so there are relatively few artists who move into that area.
Harry worked in many mediums, and they appear to be different. Jewelry, monotypes, furniture, sculpture. But honestly, in his mind, they were all one. There were no boundaries or labels.
I won't be at all bothered if they don't accept me as a musician. I am not really a musician, and by that same definition, I am not a sculptor. Not having attended classes in sculpture, so forth, yet reference has been made. I really don't care much one way or the other, because all along my life, I don't think I fitted into a very specific mold anyway. And if I become aware that I am pushed into one, I'll see to it that I burst out of it as soon as possible.
And I think Harry was developing a what is it philosophy, questioning what life is and what nature is.
In his mind, it was all one. Harry was very cosmic. He had this understanding, or at least vision, of the universe in which everything was connected.
Harry always felt that living in nature afforded him the greatest contact to his inner inspiration. So all of the works, whether they were commissioned works or personal works like these Cynambian sculptures, had to do with the shapes of things, reeds along a riverbank, bulrushes.
Bertoia's work obviously crosses over between sculpture, design, kind of environmental design ideas, sound, music, and even, let's say, performance.
That's an experiential type of art that is pretty unique in sculpture and it really is on the cutting edge, the avant-garde of what was going on in contemporary art at that time in the 60s and 70s.
I've heard the people who worked with him at that time described the way he handled metal. He handled metal the way Mozart handled a piano. He just knew what to do.
It's like a monotype. It's done in reverse. It's done from the back of the paper. Well, the drawing served either as a point of departure, or the reverse. I don't quite know. It's not clear yet to me. It could be that these drawings began to generate their own life. Mm-hmm. And they keep going, and I'm still doing them.
The monotypes were where he jotted down his ideas, and they were very fast, they were quick, they were instinctual. And he talked about that process, that he felt that he was divinely inspired, really, that his creativity was coming from a higher source, and that it came directly through him and out of his hands and onto the paper.
As he started out, even before getting to Cranbrook, he was doing little toothpick sculptures, he was doing woodcut prints.
My entry to Cranbrook was of so important that I feel it was one of the basic periods of my life, where things began really to change and happen.
Harry won a scholarship to the Cranbrook Academy of Art in 1937, and he entered as a student of painting, but quickly discovered that 2 dimensions was not enough for him. And that's where he first became acquainted, really, with metal.
One of Harry Bertoia's requirements as a scholarship student was that he would operate the metal shop. And so with some training that he had at Cass Tech High School, as well as the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts, he began operating the metal shop as a service department to the other areas. It wasn't yet a separate department at the academy.
During this early period at Cranbrook, he made things like rings as well as brooches and necklaces.
At wartime in the 40s, it was difficult to get metals, but the metals he did get, he would make beautiful, sometimes hammered jewelry. In
fact, here in Saarinen House, we have an example of a piece of 3 pieces of hollowware that he created in 1938, 1939, just after arriving at Cranbrook. And they are very clearly works that relate to works by Eliel Saarinen.
For Harry, it was a completely pivotal time when he met with these people who were going to be influential in his later life. Eero Saarinen was the one who gave him his first commission for an architectural job. And of course, Florence Knoll hired him for designing the chairs. He worked with Charles Eames. Plus, he met my mother, Brigitte, there. Can't forget about Brigitte. She was a real character.
The period that Harry Bertoia is at Cranbrook, 1937 to 1943, is this golden era. I think it really demonstrates how Cranbrook itself was really the cradle of modernism.
Meeting these people were like stepping stones for him to advance.
You know, there was a real divide at that time between the decorative art and the fine art. And I think one of the great things about Harry is the way that he bridged those 2 worlds, really coming out of Cranbrook.
1943, pretty pivotal year for him. That's the year that he and Brigitte marry. It's the year that they ultimately leave Cranbrook to move out to California. It's when his career is really placed on a national platform by having work included in what became the Guggenheim.
And it was, I think, the 3rd pregnancy of my wife, which somehow determined the shape of these chairs too. Although I was sitting in it, still the thought comes, you know, What should be a comfortable chair for a pregnant woman?
I first encountered Harry Bertoia through his furniture. He designed really one series of furniture, and it's just incredibly successful.
Which is very sculptural. He called it more air than chair.
He made the chairs with Knoll, the furniture company, and he only worked for Knoll for 2 years. They would carry his sculptures in their showrooms, and they would sell them from time to time, and they never took a commission.
This wonderful deep chair is really a piece of sculpture. If you saw that in a sculpture garden, you would say, what a great piece of sculpture.
That was really the beginning of the next phase of his life.
Bent metal, Harry began to receive commissions of all different sizes for outdoor sculptural commissions.
Large sculptures for public exhibition, screens and tonals, and whatever he touched when it was with metal became extraordinary. He would take different alloys and search for sounds. And this is where we move into the history of art. His work with creating sounds with metal, from metal, is unique.
Harry was sitting in his upholstered chair, slightly moving back and forth like this, and he begins talking about his childhood memories of when I was a child of 6 or 7, I remember hearing the sounds of gypsies hitting pots and pans, and I knew that those sounds were the ones that I loved.
The world was prescribed by the ability to bicycle for a day. And I think I was able to cover a radius of about 25 miles. So I did not know any of Italy beyond that point prior to coming to the States.
Harry grew up in Italy in a small village, San Lorenzo, in the northern part of Italy, about 50 miles north of Venice. He loved to talk about Italy and sing folk songs. Sometimes on a drive up to Allentown, we'd be singing Santa Lucia. Very naive and inexperienced, came to Detroit. He left at age 15, so quite young, and he didn't speak English.
Early on, I'm sure he was not highly educated in the history of art. A few books, perhaps, but he was an immigrant, and so was Brigida. But Brigida's family was steeped in art. Harry's family was a more peasant type of family from Italy. And Harry, through his sheer talent, was able to explore the dimensions of art.
Occasionally, we would visit him at the shop. It was a 3-mile walk from the house to the shop in Bali. And on a summer day, we'd walk out there, and it's rural, stop and drink some water out of someone's spigot.
The studio, let's say 1952, just after we moved here to Pennsylvania, and Harry was developing the chairs at that time.
The shop in Bali was originally a car dealership repair shop, Quigley Chevrolet. I think they're still in Bali. It was this old rickety building. You could feel the wind coming in through the windows, and the stairway had a couple holes in it, and the stairs were a little wobbly, so it was pretty fun for us kids. The good thing was it was huge, so Harry could build his sculptures in there, except for the very largest ones.
See, Bertoia was doing very large commissioned works for years, and they were, from a physical viewpoint, impossible to do alone. He had also 2 welders from Ireland, two brothers who worked daily for him. So these 2 Flanagan brothers, especially Ed Flanagan, the older one, That guy could really do all these steps, also for the very large bushes. And Bertoia was the one then at the end, when that was all established, he would then sit down and do all these myriads of dots, little balls, to finish them.
While he was doing that work in the daytime with his assistants at the shop, he'd come home for dinner, read a magazine, take a little nap, and then go back to work. He'd go back to the shop at about 9 o'clock and oftentimes work till 11 or 12. And sometimes he would just completely lose track of time and stay through the night. His workers would come in 8 o'clock the next morning and he's in the same clothes as yesterday and they're saying, "Harry, what are you doing?"
By 1972, I actually worked with him full-time here in the studio.
Here's the late sculptor, Harry Bertoia.
To me, imagination is an active thing. When I look at a piece of metal, right away, I'm thinking of something to do with it. I now build sculptures that can move in the wind, or that can be touched and played like an instrument. My works are all over the world, but for years, I've kept my best pieces at home, which is really my laboratory. That may seem strange, but I'm constantly testing my ideas to improve on them.
As Harry was bending, almost kinking, breaking a piece of beryllium copper, the sound really rang with him. When rod touches rod, purposely, the sound comes out to the point where, what is this? And he was fascinated.
That was the first time Bertoia made a sound object. From then on, he would take bundles of bronze rods or silicon bronze, whatever, mounted them on square plates, and then that's what you have today, all these hundreds and hundreds of sound objects.
But when Harry started working on his Sonambian sculptures, these sound sculptures, in the middle 60s, these were metal sculptures on a personal level. Some of them could be 20 feet high. Some of them could be 6 inches high.
When he was a youngster in Italy, and his family members, a lot of them played various instruments, and Harry never learned how to play any instrument. And he always wished that there was some kind of instrument that anyone could play, that you didn't have to study years to be a maestro. And indeed, that's what he created.
He began to experiment with sound and metal, and eventually came up with the Sonambian sculptures that you would generally be familiar with. But what you're probably not familiar with is that when he first began to make these, nobody had ever made them, of course, and he didn't know how. Can I show you a picture of an early piece that Harry made that, oh, here it is. This is a sculpture that was in the barn. The difference between this piece, where you see these objects not able to hit one another, and what he later created, where the rods would hit one another and begin to make special sounds.
He had a deep understanding of metal and the different alloys and the properties, and once he got into the sounding sculptures, that really came out. He discovered which metals sounded better and had a more resonant tone. The way that Harry played his sounding sculptures was quite different from anyone I've ever seen. When he invited us in for a barn concert, it was a kind of a sacred experience.
If we go way back to the 50s, and that was, of course, I was a little boy, and my sister Lesta, little girl, and we used to jump off the hayloft. This was the hay barn for the farm.
The Sunambient barn began as a humble Pennsylvania barn.
Harry recognized that as he was working with these sound sculptures in the studio in Bali, he really needed more space, almost like a new architectural concept.
Somewhere around 1969, Harry had the whole thing remodeled, upgraded into basically a little concert hall.
Let's move these pieces out of the studio to the barn and create a sounding laboratory, a sound environment with over 90 sounding pieces in there. People go in and, oh, this environment. They're totally, and however stressful their day was, oh, they just love it. They meditate and they're healing. What Harry invented goes beyond, and now it's art creates art.
There's already movement happening inside, just because air is moving around inside of the barn, so the Sunambients are slightly swaying or almost paranormal, I guess, to sort of be submerged in nature, like out in rural Pennsylvania in this barn and surrounded in this structure by this sort of metallic forest.
It was just as important for him to understand how these sound sculptures would work not as individual solo instruments, but what would happen if you put a whole bunch of tall sculptures together and then a whole bunch of sculptures that looked like they had little tomato cans on top, and some others that had very thin, wispy stems that could have been reeds or something like this. And what happens when you now fill the room up with all of these instruments?
Harry was experimenting in the late 1960s and making very stubby, short sound sculptures and placing them later in the Sunambient barn. My mother used to almost play the tune of Big Ben of London. Because early on, Harry used to, when I was younger, just throw me in the air a little bit and catch me. And at first I was afraid, but he would throw me higher and catch me. And it was at a point where even a photo by Dick Schultz showed that I was smiling way up in the air because I knew Harry would catch me.
I must have been maybe 5 or 6, I don't know. And I knew how to swim, but the ocean is a little more rough than the little pond we had in our backyard. So somehow I got caught in the undertow And all I remember is these strong arms lifting me out of there and saving me, and I could breathe again. And honestly, that was almost a symbol for how Harry was in my life. He wasn't home that much, really, because he was such a workaholic. He was so passionate about doing his work. But when he was home, his presence was very much felt by all of us in the family.
I remember vividly, and he could whistle and hum at the same time. Amazing sounds that Harry Bertoia would do personally.
There was a time, or several times, where he would let us choose a piece for our own possession. And that was pretty special too. Again, I don't know that I exactly understood what art was or his role in the art world, but I knew that he was doing the right work.
I remember a few days before his death, I knocked on the screen door on the side of the house and was going to see Brigitte say hi. I knew Harry was not well, but I didn't know things had gotten as bad as they were. But I knocked on the door, and he came out and said hello.
When he had cancer, was terminally ill, and was dying, it was a very challenging time for him because he had so much he wanted to do still, and he wasn't able to do that, so he had to prioritize. But he worked like a madman up until he literally couldn't walk anymore.
And then Harry began work on designing the gong, which is one of the largest gongs ever made, to be hung between his house and his barn.
When Harry Bertoia died, far too young, it's a very emotional, very emotional thing. When I was in Europe for a year, he wrote 2 letters. And he said, I'm dying. So I disrupted my stay in Berlin. And I made it just before he was died. My daughter Naomi and myself, on a beautiful November day in fall, visited him for the last time and couldn't speak at all, only whisper or make signs. And I had to bend way down over him, and he said, Klaus, it's for you. It's time for you to take over.
And he came to me in a dream where I saw him off in the distance, and I was so happy to see my dad. Hey, there he is. And he came toward me. He didn't say a word, but he looked so tired and wan and worn that I understood what he went through that last year.
It was huge, a 400-year-old oak tree, huge, maybe 4-foot diameter. The oak tree, almost miraculously, in one very calm night, no rain, no wind, very peaceful, and I think it was summertime, collapsed.
My mom told me that she woke up in the middle of the night and she thought there was an earthquake because things actually shook.
And I felt that was almost a landmark of Harry Bertoia.
He was the caretaker of that land for decades. The master of the land was gone, and then the master of the trees was gone. There was some kind of relationship there. Harry's words: "Man is not important. Humanity is what counts, to which I feel I have given my contribution. Humanity shall continue without me, but I'm not going away. I'm not leaving you. Every time you see some treetops moving in the wind, you will think of me. Or if you see some beautiful flowers, you'll think of me. And I do."
He had an inner radiance, the difference between a diamond and a pearl. A diamond glitters. A pearl, the deeper you can see into it, the finer it is.
He was a man of so many talents, I think directly derived from nature, inspired as well as the strength and power he had. Just for example, he would run through the lawn and do a flip, land on his feet.
Harry was a gift to this world. Short-lived, but he came from someplace else. He was such a metals man. He said, yeah, you have this piece of metal in your hand and you feel certain emotions and you just shape it.
I mean, ultimately, he always thought as a metal worker. I mean, you think about his diamond chair series, that is a metal worker thinking as a furniture designer.
He showed me that he was Superman, and he did so many phenomenal things. He was a real discoverer and inventor, and find out what works, what doesn't work. And of course, the chair designs in the 50s, comfortable for the human body, and then the sound sculptures of the 70s, comfortable for a human spirit. So I think his philosophy was always connected with the cosmos, the universe, with nature, very inspired from natural forms and sounds.
Harry simply gave you a kind of grounded, matter-of-fact explanation, not technical, of what his thinking was when he created things.
I'm very happy that the nature of the instrument.
He would tell you that he was thinking about the oceans or the wind.
There was a lot of energy in his hands. And if he came behind you and gave you a little squeeze on your shoulder, I mean, it was powerful.
He had the strength that he could bend bars that were so, no one else could do that.
I wouldn't describe Bertoia as a person who was prideful, but I would describe him as a person who was humble and aware of something sacred inside of him.
Thank you. So you've probably been looking at these things, wondering what they are, wonder what they do. So there was a man, Harry Bertoia, who lived in Bartow, PA. Anybody know where Bartow is? It's just down, yeah, oh good, a lot of people. It's about 20 minutes from here, down Route 100.
What I have noticed is that there's a new interest in his work, and so I think that we will see his work kind of seep into some more sound art work.
So I was approached by the Museum of Arts and Design for a commission specifically for this exhibition. I definitely feel that the sun ambients were pieces of art that would then beget other art. It definitely seems to me that that was Harry's goal, to create something that would then be expandable.
Harry Bertoia's work is incredibly accessible. The idea of just the pure vibrations of it, apart from your ability to hear it, you feel it. And I think that that is something not fully understood and very rare in a fine art setting. Harry was very aware of that and spoke a lot about the vibrations and the sort of had a lot of meaning to him. And I think that's one of what made the sun ambient installation so powerful, was the actual feeling of it.
I had this idea to take these two shapes, the shapes of the sun ambient structures, which are these rods that are kind of in a line upright, and then the shape of the cross-hatched metal structure of the Pritzker Pavilion speaker array, the trellis, and to sort of combine those. And I also really liked the idea of taking the sounds from the sun ambient and almost just like exploding them out into this much, much larger scale, so that I could just imagine the kind of like constellations of sound that could happen from far away and near, and just like in this kind of football field sized location. And I kind of pulled that out using these digital filtering techniques. And the idea behind this section was to sort of have the other time-like sounds kind of grow out of this low drone. So then these sounds are left intact, and you can kind of hear the metal banging against metal, and you can obviously kind of place those or identify them as Bertoia's sounds. You know, seeing people approach those sculptures does kind of speak to the accessibility of his work and the idea that everybody can experience this sublime quality to it. You don't really necessarily need to have some kind of context, like an intellectual context or like a theoretical background to just get something from these works. They're just beautiful pieces.
When we finished making the film, Harry gave us one of the sculptures as a gift. And later, living with that sculpture, which was in our apartment, we knew that we wanted a couple of other sculptures. This little sculpture here and another one. So by showing the film, it would be, we realized, quite wonderful if people can touch the sculptures, touch the art, listen to it. Children who couldn't speak and were deaf would play these and would hear the vibrations. Little tiny babies would crawl across the floor and touch these and would be completely amazed.
This is the one that was here when Brigitte visited Cranbrook in the late 1980s. I remember proudly showing her the work, and as I was about to play it, she stopped me. She proceeded to show me how one should start out playing them very gently from the corners and then gradually build up to a crescendo. So I'll do my best to play this particular one the way that Brigitte taught me how to play it.
The Harry Bertoia Foundation began as an idea in my mind, and as I began assessing my life, I realized that there was no one carrying the torch for Harry Bertoia. And I thought, well, maybe that person needs to be me. Val does certain things, but it's sort of a different vein. So I decided I was going to take on this task. We're actually looking for a museum home for a good chunk of the original Synambient collection now. And one of my requests is that they keep them all together and we can continue this experience for the public.
I think there was hope that the barn could remain intact, certainly during Harry's lifetime. But he also had ideas and had shared publicly many ideas about an enclosure for his work. He had, I believe, worked on designs for it. And he also talked about a museum that would host this collection.
In recent years, his work is being sold at auction at very high prices, and I'm sure that under the large gong hanging over Harry's grave, there is a smile when you hit that gong saying that every artist who makes the real stuff gets to live forever in the hearts and the minds of people who want to see his work.
It's always nice to have of several Bertoias and not just have one isolated piece. When we've done our best work, we've done 2 standalone Bertoia auctions. And there's this dialogue that starts to occur between the pieces. So we've been able to do special installations. The barn is the most pure experience. Museums can really have their place to elevate the work because they don't often play them. That has its limitations, but we love it, seeing Bertoia's work in museums.
There needs to be a place where his work can be heard in large ensemble, like an orchestra, in a special room, no longer the barn, but in a room which would be designed acoustically.
Celia, I know, is hoping that those pieces, the body of the work, and Lesta, the body of the work, they're hoping will be released to a museum for a single room or a sound room, which would be delightful. There's a lot of difference between Val's work and Harry's work. Harry's work was generally, I always would say masterful, but that doesn't mean that Val isn't a master of his own craft. Harry's work was always highly organized.
I wrote the book, The Life and Work of Harry Bertoia, because I felt the need for people to know Harry as a human. There are several books out on his work and a little bit about him as a person, but I wanted to offer the perspective as a family member, as his daughter. I think that Harry was with me writing the book, and I suspect he wanted it written too. And certain points in the book, I got a little bit lost, didn't quite know which direction to go. And he would come to me in dreams.
Celia Bertoia has become more active in the past, 5, 6, 7 years, and has really helped, I think, sort of bring a new perspective within the family. And she formed the Harry Bertoia Foundation. She's worked actively to market Harry's work and name, and to keep the legacy sort of out there in the world. She's put out a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and I think that's been really good.
It has been a delight working with Celia to create a foundation for the beginnings of a flowering organization.
This is an artist with extraordinary creativity, elasticity of mind, and an artist full of surprises. I think of Bertoia as somebody who, every time I see a new piece by Bertoia, I say, wow, that's different.
This is my favorite picture of my father and I. We had some kind of simpatico. I mean, he was a powerful man, even though at the same time he was gentle and humble, which is sort of a dichotomy, but it really was true. He didn't care about his name being splashed about. He didn't even sign his pieces because he felt that it was coming from a divine source, this creativity.
Bertoia is one of the very fascinating figures of American modernism, of machine-age modernism, who starts out in his career really embracing, what are all the new ways that, sort of being a metal worker, how can you reinvent things like the chair? And Bertoia is part of that reinvention, using the technologies of the machine age to change the world around us. But through art, he also found his way back to nature.
Sound installation is actually becoming like a real thing that museums are making space for. And so I think that this is a great moment for Bertoia's work to come back into, the consciousness.
To interact with the sculptures was something that was really important because of the fact that, the physicality and the tactility of touching them and moving around. It's not only something where you're playing them, but you are moving with them.
Was he a furniture designer? Yes, one of the best. Was he a sculptor? Yes. Within the field of sculpture, did he make major contributions to the field of architectural sculpture? Yes. Did he have a vision that created these very unique sonambient sculptures, sound sculptures? They've been called many things. Yes. Related to that, was he a musician? Yes. Was he a jeweler? Yes. Was he a printmaker? Yes.
The functions that I see that are most important are a catalog raisonné of all of his work. I've actually been working on that for years and years and years. I see that as an important function because his work runs through so many types of art.
I opened my auction house in 2000. At that time, the market for Harry Bertoia's sculpture was really low. His market has been really wonderful in so much as it is, for the most part, increased sort of steadily over time. I've done over 100 auctions and sold over 600 sculptures by Bertoia now, 17 years later.
Ultimately, I think history is going to define Harry Bertoia as this modern Renaissance man, a person who was interested in many different areas and brought expertise and skill and passion to all of these areas.
One more quote from Harry. The acceptance of the reality of the dream as a stimulant and the propellant toward achieving the other reality generated an atmosphere of involvement rather than passivity. Immersion into the vast recesses of the mind, leading to the realization that the inner world is as immense as the cosmos outside. At this eternal moment, I have a gut feeling that awareness of the miracle of life is the purpose of life. I might never know.